the cloud of witnesses is something we read about in Hebrews, right?
That's right.
I have come to a interesting poetic idea of what that might mean in a practical way for us living on the earth. When I write a song that feels inspired and almost like I didn't have to even write it or think about it, it feels to me like I'm pulling it down. I'm taking like combinations of thoughts and ideas down and putting them together in a new order. And I think about the cloud of witnesses. I'm like, sometimes I feel like inspiration is just for a moment. I'm catching like a glimmer of light from that cloud or sound, and then I look at it and I sort of am transported into that place.
You're listening to the Ferment podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Audrey Assad. Audrey is a recording artist, songwriter, and record producer from Nashville, Tennessee. Just a quick producer's note, this podcast was recorded on one mic rather than our regular two-mic setup. This episode is brought to you by Monk Drums. Monk Drums is a creative desert venture that strives to combine beauty and business as one heartbeat. Monk Drums' main focus is handcrafted wooden drums that allow us to love, assist, and serve all who accompany us on this path. Use the coupon code FERMENTPOD to get 5% off your Monk Drums order. Find them on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Monk Drums, and every Monday look for hashtag Monk Drum Monday. Speaking from personal experience, Monk Drums are wonderfully crafted and they sound amazing. They blend the best traits of both the djembe and the cajon, and I found them to be incredibly versatile in both the live and studio environment. Check them out at monkdrums.com.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, with new songs being added all the time. Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. You can also find them on social media, Facebook at worshipteam.com, Twitter at worshipteam, Instagram at worshipteam_WT. Visit them at worshipteam.com for a free trial today. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com.
Hello, Ferment podcast listeners. My name's Mike O'Brien, the director of the Vineyard School of Worship. Our summer session training intensive is happening this June 2019 in both Columbus, Ohio, and Los Angeles. This dynamic hands-on training is for worship leaders age 18 to 35 who are either new to the journey or simply need some fresh inspiration and training. Students will learn the essentials of biblical worship, Vineyard values in worship, how to build a set list, how to lead effective rehearsals, lessons in every instrument, songwriting, sound, and so much more. Find out more at vsow.org, VSOW.org, and use the code FERMENT15 for 15% off. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in June.
All right, everybody. Hey, my name is Adam Russell. You're listening to the Ferment podcast, and I am in Nashville, Tennessee, in a studio that's in a house with Audrey Assad.
Hi.
I've been wanting to do this for a while, Audrey. Ever since you and I met a few years ago in New York, and I've told you this story, but I just want to document it on the podcast. I'm not really an emotionally vulnerable person. And one of the things I discovered was I was introduced really to you and your music in this moment. I think you remember we were up in this church.
Yeah.
And you sang your song.
Church of Sweden.
That's right. You sang your song in the fields of the Lord up there. It was not amplified.
Yeah.
There was no sound system. It was being recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And I was overcome with like emotion and tears. And then I did sort of a deep dive into your music, and I've gotten to experience you as a performer a couple times since then as well. And I have just found I think the best way to say this is I am emotionally vulnerable to your music and to your singing.
Okay.
So I wanted to do this for a while. I've wanted to have this conversation because I think there's something that you have as a gift that is really special and unique.
Thank you.
Yeah. Before we really dive into the music side a little bit, though, we almost always start with where'd you come from?
Yeah.
How'd you get here? Kind of stuff.
Okay.
Where are you from?
From New Jersey.
Yeah.
Born and raised. Lived there till I was 18. And then I spent some time in West Palm Beach, Florida for 6 years because my parents moved down there. I'll go back to Jersey in a second. But I went from Jersey to Florida to Nashville. I've been living in Nashville about 11 years, with a 1.5-year stint in Phoenix, Arizona in the middle there somewhere. I still haven't lived in the Northwest, but I've made it to all the other quadrants of the country so far. So maybe that'll happen in the next 5 years. So yeah, I was raised in New Jersey, and it's, my context for my whole religious upbringing. And
like urban Jersey or suburban?
Well, at different parts, different times at different parts. So I was born in Secaucus, which is right outside Newark, and then lived in Jersey City. So that's urban Jersey for sure. And then we moved to the suburbs when I was about 6 or 7 years old. So I was mostly raised in suburban New Jersey in a town called Scotch Plains, which, it's a little New England town, Italian-Irish immigrants, mostly soccer town, all the things that I think people don't know much about New Jersey usually. But if you've been to Jersey, you know those towns.
Yeah.
The little Cape Cod houses. And George Washington stayed at the little inn on the main street during some battle.
Always, right?
Yeah.
All of those towns are soaked with a certain kind of history.
Yeah, Union battles. So.
That's right. And then what was your sort of religious upbringing? Were you guys a family of faith?
We were.
Yeah.
My dad was a refugee from Syria, and he had been raised actually Christian Missionary Alliance for the majority of his childhood in the Middle East. And then when he came to the States, he was kind of adopted, informally by him and his family. Were sort of folded in by this guy who had been sending checks over to the Middle East because my dad was in a sponsored child program. And they were very poor. And so there was like the one person he knew when they came here. And they went to a church. Basically he got them involved in a church community that I was raised in called Plymouth Brethren. So that was how I was raised. And my dad just kind of stayed there. I'm assuming because he knew no one else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was his contact point. And so he was just sort of enveloped and wrapped there.
Yeah, and my uncle is still part of that, and my dad's twin brother. And then until she died, my grandmother was, so that definitely was and my mom's whole family as well.
So your dad met your mother in this community?
At a Bible conference in Grove City, Pennsylvania, at Grove City College, but it was a Plymouth Brethren conference. And I went to that conference every summer of my life till I was about 19.
So it was like their big gathering.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 1,000 people. Yeah. That's it. But yes.
Whatever that is.
And there are people from overseas. I mean, it's small. It's a small denomination, although it is global.
Got it.
They're in probably almost every country, to be honest.
Got it. Wow. Okay. So I'm not really all that familiar with Plymouth Brethren. What does that mean? In the sort of cornucopia of spiritual expression in America, or maybe even globally, what is their contribution or vibe?
We are, I think, famous without people knowing who we are, if that makes sense, because the person sort of responsible for the genesis of Plymouth Brethren is a man named John Nelson Darby. Okay. Most people who have studied Protestant theology will have at least encountered him once or twice because he was responsible for propagating the pre-tribulational rapture theory.
Got it. Yeah.
And so that is our heritage. We come from his ideas and movement.
So was eschatology a big thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So did that loom large in your childhood?
Absolutely. I mean, we were dispensationalists, which is, another, it's a hermeneutic, essentially, a way of looking at both the Bible and history through the lens of this kind of idea that God works in these specific dispensations of grace. And so we studied charts of that as children.
There's these big epochs of time.
Yeah. And so it's like we study, and then we believed that we were living in the last dispensation before the tribulation. So we studied Revelation at least once a year. Okay. In depth,
Was that scary? Okay, yeah, I was going to say, because
I thought it was. Maybe not everybody did, but I
but
did.
You experienced it as
I internalized it as terrifying for sure, but also very important. So I was very focused on all the things that become urgent when you believe something like that. Yeah, because we also believed that you could not, once the tribulation came, if you weren't raptured, you had no chance. We were not second chancers. So like, if you were not raptured, then you had to endure the next 7 years, but like you were definitely going to hell at the end. So like,
man, that's even worse.
I know.
That 7 years is actually worse than hell, right?
It's actually worse because you know like, it's coming. You're like, if this is this bad.
It's like those things in the movies or, you know, those little thought experiments. Do you want to know when you're going to die?
Totally.
Would you like to know the date? It's
like, would you like to know, but have to wait because killing yourself would be, I don't know why I wouldn't kill myself in that situation. I feel like I should put a content warning here, but I'm like, if I know I'm going to die and I know I'm going to go to hell, then like, why does it matter anymore if I commit the worst sin ever?
Yeah.
You know, but I was so terrified. I took it very seriously. And so I was a young evangelist because I didn't want any of my friends to go through that.
Well, listen, at least you were consistent with your belief system.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was 7 years old and witnessing to my friends and I was like, I don't want you to go to hell.
This is so precious.
I presented them with such a simplistic thing. I was sort of like, you need to just acknowledge that Jesus is God and that he's your Lord and Savior so you don't go to hell. You know, it was a very like, that's the way I viewed it for myself.
It was mathematical.
Yeah, transactional.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, I don't know, I want to say it's more or less how it was presented to me, even though I heard about the love of God. I mean, it was contrasting it against this kind of like very colorfully painted, terrifying image. And so
I think that's just something that happens when we take the gospel of the kingdom, if I could frame it that way, and do the thing that sort of happened perhaps uniquely in America and just reduce it all the way down to the gospel, which is really don't go to hell when you die.
Right.
That's what we mean. Don't go to hell when you die.
Right. That's what
like everything is about getting a person to say this word or these words, shake the preacher's hand, get baptized, and then you don't go to hell when you die.
Exactly. And it's like you can talk all day long about how it's different than that, but if what you boil your message down to is that, then I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of people grow up in an environment where that's the bottom line.
That is. Well, I actually think that what we're talking about right now, and even this idea, is one of the main reasons that so many people, especially in their 30s and 40s, and even beyond that, but especially in their 30s and 40s, are, you know, quote unquote, deconstructing.
Sure. I mean, I've done that.
Well, guilty. Same. And I feel like I'm come out from the other side of that now.
I am too.
I really do. But I think that so many people have had these experiences of having to question everything because we grew up with such a reduced...
The foundation of everything turned out to be ultimately kind of a self-protectionist or like calamity driven, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think when that's the base, whether or not it was what was preached or just how you internalized it. Yeah. Because I've come to see that it almost doesn't matter what someone says to you because how you internalize it is how you end up living it.
That's right.
And the way that I internalized that was like tragedy is around the corner. Yeah. You know, calamity is nigh. And it was sort of this just get everybody that you can to do or say or perform this formula so that they don't experience eternal conscious torment, which really revealed that I felt very insecure about that too. Like for myself, you know, and I was very terrified that I hadn't really been saved or whatever.
Oh, did you get saved multiple times?
Yes.
In quotation marks.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think I actually
Or you prayed those prayers.
Yeah. I developed an OCD condition that I now know is called scrupulosity. It's religious OCD.
So you're talking about something real here?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And
okay. I've never heard of
I think it developed from, or at least partially from, that environment mixed with my obsessive sort of tendency. And scrupulosity is a real disorder that I lived with unknowingly for many years, till 5 years ago, I would say. And one of the ways it manifested for me was because I had this fear, this existential fear of hell and of the tribulation, of the rapture and all that. I would lay awake 3 hours a night sometimes as a child, saying the sinner's prayer over and over and over and over because I kept thinking like, maybe I didn't say it perfectly. Maybe I didn't mean it hard enough. Maybe, you know, I got distracted for a second during that one. I'll just keep doing it. I mean, so yes, I got saved many times.
Yeah, that's a that's a heartbreaking little story in some
I
ways.
agree. I always
Especially
feel
when-
sadness when I talk about it.
Yeah, especially when your mom and dad weren't trying to make that happen.
No, and they didn't even know I was going through that. Not really, because I thought that this is how everybody felt, so I didn't communicate that.
That's the problem with being young, right?
Yeah.
You don't know.
No, and so it was 5 years ago or so that I heard of the condition, and as soon as I read about it, it was like the scales fell from my eyes because it had continued to manifest in various ways, and no one totally can tell me if it was caused by my environment or just if my environment helped exacerbate it. Because I think even had I not been raised where I was, I mean, I just had a lot of existential fear. My son is this way. He's almost 5. And I'm like, we're not raising him in that environment. And he's already worried about death and worried about surgery and worried about, what happens to our minds when we die or when we're under anesthesia or what. He's just bent that way, and so was I, and so I think I would have had it either way, but it took on the character of the language of what I was raised with.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little partnership of both.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you grow up in this, but I know that you're Catholic now.
Right.
So, how did this happen?
Well, I was.
If you can reduce that,
I became Catholic about 12 years ago. This Easter will be 12 years.
Okay.
So I was 24. I had left the Plymouth Brethren behind when I was about 19 or 20. Like you do at that age, you just start usually.
You start owning your faith.
Yeah, or
life.
just leaving it. I mean, I was like, I just want to see what else is out here. And my version of that was so tame. Like I became a Baptist.
That is literally the funniest thing. Yeah.
I was like, it's so loose here. Women don't wear head coverings, and we sing in front of the church.
So your rebellion was becoming a Baptist.
Yeah. I mean, there were microphones and people raised their hands, and I was like, what?
You were pushing all the boundaries.
I know.
Amazing.
It's so funny. I mean,
so this was college though. Okay. Did you go to a Baptist college?
No, I went to Palm Beach Atlantic. Well, it might be technically a Southern Baptist college way back in the day, actually, now that I think about it. But they don't really identify with that now. Palm Beach Atlantic University in West Palm Beach, Florida. I was only there for 1 semester, actually. It's funny. I was there for 1 semester, and in that 1 semester, I met this kid. I mean, he was older than me. He was 22, 23 years old. And he was, oh, hello, bird.
That's right.
He was the new pastor of a young adults group at this Baptist church nearby.
Yeah.
And he said to me one day, so you play piano, you sing? And I said, yes. And he was like, would you come lead worship at this young adults thing? Which I had honestly never heard of that. What is leading worship? What is that? I don't know what that is. Because I grew up in a room where we sang a cappella 4 parts out of a hymnal. There was no worship leader, and women definitely did not sing in front of, were explicitly forbidden from singing in front of anyone in a mixed room.
Okay, so hang on, just time
out.
What does that mean? So everyone's together, it's a cappella, but only the men sang?
Well, no, the women sang if everyone was singing, but not in front. But there could be men could sing in front of the room.
So there was no female special music.
Correct. Yeah. That was not allowed because that was considered preaching and usurping male authority.
Okay, so women did nothing.
Nothing. No praying out loud, no asking questions, no reading scripture, no, nothing.
Well, Audrey, you're just so brave.
I really rebelled.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I do think it's hysterical. You became a Baptist.
I know.
You started leading worship.
Yeah, and I had to ask him, what is leading worship? He's like, what do you mean? What is it? I'm like, well, I don't know what that is.
That is so good.
And so he gave me a Passion CD and a Hillsong United CD.
That's right.
And it was the one with Jesus, you are my best friend on it. Do you remember that? Jesus, you are my best friend.
I don't know that one.
And I was like, this is wild,
Yeah.
And
but did you grow up with, so just taking off of that lyric there, did you grow up with sort of the concept of or a highly personalized God, highly personalized Jesus?
No.
Okay. So even the lyric, Jesus, you are my best friend.
Like, what?
It's not even, the lyric. Yeah, the lyric is.
You know, we did sing What a Friend We Have in Jesus and stuff like that. But that's like it's still pretty corporate.
Yeah.
All our sins and griefs to bear.
Yeah.
What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer.
Yeah.
It's like, it's still very formal. You know?
Yeah, was it super personal?
Informality? Definitely not.
Was it warm?
No.
Yeah.
But I do really miss, I will say, another side note, I miss that singing because everybody sang, everybody knew how to sing because we grew up around it. And being in a room full of people who are singing at full voice is a very like emotionally, biologically, spiritually healing experience. And we don't really get it very much. And so I missed that, but I do think it was a step into wholeness for me to start encountering Jesus as a person and I was a person. And, you know, I've heard a lot of complaints about those types of lyrics from people in particularly like Calvinist communities.
Of course.
But I just know that for me, I mean, at that moment in my life, I was like, I was bowled over and healed by that, you know, in a certain way.
It's still healing for me. Yeah, I went through, as we mentioned a moment ago, like a pretty intense deconstruction phase for about 5 years. I've come back out of it, and I think things feel a lot better, you know? But I realized that one of the things I couldn't give up in deconstruction was a personal Jesus who loved me.
Mm-hmm.
I could not let go of that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And to sing is really important.
I agree.
Yeah.
So
Jesus.
Totally. Yeah. Like one of my favorite songs out of like whatever you want to call it, vineyard. I don't know if it's a vineyard song. I think so.
What is it?
What a Friend I Found.
No, that's Martin Smith. That's in my opinion, it's a great song. It's a perfect song.
Oh, I like can't even get through it. I mean, even through my whole deconstruction, which honestly probably, if I could encapsulate it to a time period, it lasts about 7 years, long time.
Yeah.
And the whole time, if I would be somewhere and would sing that, I would just not be able to make it because I was like, this feels so, it felt untrue to me at the time, but so beautiful that I wanted it so badly, you know? And I was like, oh, like, this is painful, you know?
Yeah.
But so yeah, I had Napster at the time, you know? And so I started like downloading everything I get my hands on. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
But I bought CDs and I went to Passion Conference and I learned how to lead worship watching Chris Tomlin and Christy Nockels and, you know, would come home fired up and writing songs. And
so did that kick off songwriting for you?
Yeah.
So you just felt like in this space of like, hey, please lead worship. You go see Passion. You felt permission?
So actually, I have to mention this part because I think it's important. So right around the time, about a month before I met this guy, maybe a month before, because it was January of 2002. I was 19 years old. I was about to start school. So I was about to meet this guy, Stephen. If you're listening, Stephen.
What up, Stephen?
So I was deep in some like horrible shame battles, and I had a pornography addiction in high school that was it wasn't as much of an issue as a behavior at the time, but I was crippled by the shame from that experience because I had never told a single soul. I thought I was the only woman in the world experiencing this. I mean, I just had all kinds of like shame and compulsive behaviors coming out of that because I had this OCD condition. So I was like plucking out all my hair and like, it was just this really, but no one knew, you know, I was very outwardly,
you were
the
put
perfect
together.
Christian kid.
Yeah, you were put together.
So someone had given me a copy of this book that I don't even know if I would recommend because I don't remember almost anything it said, but it was called Secrets of the Vine by Bruce Wilkinson, who wrote The Prayer of Jabez. And it was sitting on my shelf for years. And I was like, just sort of resistant to it for some reason, you know? Yeah. And then one night at like 1 a.m., I picked it up. And it was basically, it was just a little short book about the parable of the vine and the branches. Yeah. It was the first time it occurred to me that the vine and the branches were connected.
That's right.
I was like, oh, I mean, all this time I've been thinking like, you're way up here and I'm way down here. But that's not really true.
Yeah.
It was my first experience of oneness and unity and like communing with God, honestly, really, in any real way. And so it was where I got the bravery to start talking to friends about what I was experiencing. And I talked to my parents. And then I started writing songs. I had never written a song. It never occurred to me to write a song, really. I tried a little bit when I was in high school, but like for fun. I never thought it would be my living. I never thought it was my calling. None of that, you know? And so I started writing music, and then I met Stephen, and he said, would you lead worship? And I was like, what is that? I got the CDs. I printed out a bunch of charts, clumsily like strumming my acoustic guitar, you know, with 10 other people. And that was where it began.
Amazing. Things there that I just hear and want to just interject. One about the vine and the branches.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who has a vineyard.
Yeah, I wanted to tell that story because this is
great.
called the Ferment.
That's right, it's the Ferment. Yeah, and listen, as someone who owns a vineyard with many, many vines in it, not only are the vines connected to the branches, but you cannot tell where the branches stop and where the vine begins. It's all the same.
That.
Right?
It's the same organism.
It's the same.
God, it was the first time I'd ever realized it. I'd read that story many times.
And I'm pruning right now, literally. Yesterday afternoon, I'm pruning my vineyard. I mean, you can't not think of John 15 when you're out there. I'm just walking along.
Totally. And I needed that language. It really spoke to me about, I felt like the pain of being vulnerable and honest about what I was experiencing was going to heal me. And it was like, oh, if you want me to stop, like me encountering you in this way and then embarking on a journey where I'm leaving this way of living behind, whether it's pornography or the shame or the whatever, all of that is because I'm connected to you.
That's right.
And you love me, not because you are trying to punish me for my wrongdoing, you know, which is how my attitude had absolutely been.
Yeah.
I was so terrified of God smiting me. You know, I was like, God doesn't like me. Jesus like stands in the way of God.
Mm-hmm.
But I really started to slowly, I didn't really heal from that entirely in that moment. But it was the first time it occurred to me, and I was able to look back at that moment over time and remind myself, you know.
Well, it's also occurred to me in the last few years of just being in a vineyard that that even Jesus's little talk there, just what we're hitting on in John 15, there is a very, very quiet resurrection note in all of it. Mm-hmm. So if Jesus is saying that he's the vine and we're the branches, well, every vine is planted into the ground. And so there's this sense in which the life from the ground is coming out of the ground and up into the branches. Right?
I love that.
Yeah. So there's this resurrection thing that's happening there. And I think that image is like really, really quiet and wonderful for exactly what you're talking about, especially for, dealing with things like shame. Mm-hmm. Well, like how shamed can I be if I am connected to him? Right. And how shamed can I be if the life of the ground, the life of resurrection is coming to me, even in my weakest moments.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
a great story. That's a great story. So that's the context for you writing songs, though.
Yeah. Yep.
Pain.
Sure. Well, I was experiencing a lot of joy in that moment as well. Just
or just your own inner like struggles.
Yeah. Yeah. Like one of the first songs I ever wrote that I recorded, I did like a demo of it with a friend. It was called Let Me In. That was me talking to God, let me in. Now so as you can see, or just from the title, I still didn't really connect with the idea that we were already together. But I had started to understand it. But I still felt like I was out here and God was in here, or I was down here and God was up there. I mean, it was just such a chronic feeling. Mm-hmm. And I would say belief as well. You know, if I look at what I lived and how I wrote and it revealed that that's really that's the story I believed.
How old were you when you made your first record?
Really, I was 24, 23.
So you spent 5 years leading worship? And
yeah.
going to school?
Mm-hmm. No. I dropped out of school.
Okay.
I was so sure that I wanted to give music a try immediately.
And what'd your dad think?
He was fine about it. None of my family has ever graduated from college on either side. None
That's
of my
amazing.
siblings, parents, grandparents, uncles,
So you
aunts.
just called mom and dad and you were like, hey.
I was living with them. And I was just like, I think I'm going to take a year and work and like try this music thing out. And they were like, okay. So
that's tremendous. That never happens.
I know. Yeah, but like I said, I mean, none of us are educated in that way. And so it wasn't normal for someone to graduate from college. So they were like, that's fine. If you have a plan and you're not lazy and you're not living here and not working, and we don't care what you're doing,
Well, that's beautiful.
It really was.
I love that story.
Yeah, they were so open about it. And so I started working, I was a nanny, I think, for a few years. And then I worked in restaurants and such, retail stores. I worked at a maternity store and a jewelry store at one point. And I was just writing songs, and I bought a PA, mics and speakers and a mixer. And I started organizing these like writers' nights. And by the time I left West Palm Beach in January 2008, I was playing it hit a ceiling. I was playing like 5 times a week. And I was like, I think I need to move somewhere where there's a little bit more headroom. Because I'm not ever going to become the type of artist I want to be here in this town, even though it had been my incubator, So the last month I was there, I played like a farewell show if anybody listening has ever been to West Palm, there's a place called the Harriet Himmel Theater downtown. And I put a guitar case literally out on the end of the stage. And my friend Mike Donahue from 10th Avenue North, who's from Florida, or he went to school there, so that's how I know him. He played and I played, and I was like, I want to make an album, trying to raise some money. I mean, Kickstarter didn't exist, so this is what you do. And I made like $4,000.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And then over the next couple days, and everyone wrote me these notes. I don't know whose idea this was. No one
even Venmo'd you.
No, it was cash only.
Yeah.
And like then I don't know who gave this to them. I was at the time helping to lead worship. Even though I had already become a Catholic, I was still helping out at this church that met there. It was like called Christ Fellowship. And it was like a non-denominational, so they were helping with the event, and they handed everybody these slips of paper, and everybody wrote like their best wishes for me as I went to Nashville. It really felt like they were like, we're sending you, Yeah. That's a whole other conversation, working at a non-denominational church part-time when you're a Catholic. But that's like 2 questions away here. Yeah. I know. And so I made an EP in Nashville. I paid for it with that money and with some other money that I had a couple of friends that lent me some money. And that was the first real recording that I ever made. So
that's amazing.
12 years ago. 11 years ago.
So let's go back to this Catholic idea here. Like, you came out of the Brethren. You
became a Baptist.
Then
I became a Calvinist.
What?
For 2 years, I went through my Calvinist phase.
Okay.
I was really attracted to, went to a Presbyterian church. I was really attracted to the kind of sobriety of it, because I loved the sort of relative freedom of the Southern Baptist Church. It's so funny. But I was like, I kind of miss this like gravity, and I found it at this Presbyterian church near my house. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, the pastor of this little PCA community was an ex-Catholic who has now reverted to the Catholic Church.
And he had his Presbyterian moment.
He sure did. And I remember, I mean, I'm not trying to compliment myself, but just state a fact. I am such a researcher.
Yes.
I do not do anything without diving all the way in. Nothing. I mean, not a diet change, not a religious motion, nothing. And so when I went to this Presbyterian church, I was like, can I please meet? It was only like 70 or 80 people. can I meet with you and the elders? I want you to draw out for me. I want you to draw your soteriology out for me on the whiteboard.
And the elders. Yes. So you're like 22?
Yeah, 21, 22.
I
And
want to
was
meet
like,
with the pastor and the elders.
I want you to draw the soteriology of Presbyterianism on a whiteboard for me.
Yes.
And I want to contrast it with the soteriology I was raised with and the soteriology of Catholicism. So we made a big diagram at one of the elders'
But you were
house.
interested in Catholicism at this
Yeah,
point.
I was
Okay,
interested.
Got it.
But part of the reason I got so curious, although I had already been curious, is that I went to the church website and there was a big old fat picture of John Paul II on it. Like the Pope. And I was like, what?
On the Presbyterian?
Yeah. And I'm like, what the heck? Because like I started to say the other word.
Oh, you're fine.
What the hell?
That's right. That's right.
I'm like, I know that Calvinists don't like Catholicism, so what is going on here? You know? And so I talked to the pastor about it, and he was like, well, I mean, I don't believe in a lot of the doctrines of Catholicism anymore, but I really value these different things, and so we try to incorporate them into our tradition.
Was it the sacramentalism?
No, not exactly,
really,
although
okay.
they did practice some version of sacramentalism, but I mean, it was pretty far away. He was more interested in, honestly, his church history education had taught him that Catholicism had like preserved in many instances Christianity in the West and in the East as well. Like Orthodox Church and Catholic churches had, and religious communities had preserved not only religion but other types of history and art, and he just couldn't ignore that, and so it was like, it can't be all bad,
Exactly.
And so anyway, I was there for 2 years and I was singing there, and I became a Catholic while I was there. And then it's funny because he had so many people becoming Catholics from his community because he taught a church history class, and people just kept leaving and becoming Catholic. And I was like, are you?
Yeah.
And he was like, I think I might be, so then they moved to Alabama. Long story why, but they had something change in their family, and they moved down to Alabama, and he and his wife and his kids all entered the Catholic Church.
That is so fun.
And he brought so many people with him. It's funny.
Interesting that people really do reproduce what they are. Yeah. Like in their leadership, like it just sounds like this guy in his soul. Yeah. He was just a Catholic.
Still, and the one elder that I distinctly remember was so shocked. And I was like, how are you shocked? When Ken was his name, the pastor, Ken Munsterman, I'm like, how are you shocked that this man is going to be a Catholic? Like, what, have you been here the whole time? He was like the one person who didn't know, Yeah. And he was disappointed, and I don't know where he's at about now, but at the time he was like, what?
So why did you land in the Catholic?
So I think I was very attracted to sacramentalism. Okay. I was also very, very, at the time, to be frank, like still quite the fundamentalist, in that I felt like Christianity was like the mixture of a moral code and a way to understand the world. And so I was like, oh my gosh, the Catholic Church is the fullness of truth. And like, I don't have to wonder and research anymore because someone else has already done that work. So you can just tell me what to think and I'll just think it. And
so maybe it was a bit of relief.
A bit of relief.
You could let that that part of you that digs so deep, researches so hard. Yeah. You could let that rest, maybe.
Something like that. Mm-hmm. And it didn't turn out to be true. I had a like.
I'm sorry to laugh. That's so funny.
It's fine. Yeah. I had a couple years of like bliss, like after a wedding almost, and then I just was like, oh crap, like
new questions.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. But you're still Catholic for 12 years.
Yeah, yes.
Amen. That's great.
Still hanging on.
That's good. That's great.
I'm going to put it that way.
Okay,
Skin of my teeth.
That's right. That's okay. Mm-hmm. One of the things I really do appreciate about the Catholic Church is, at least from my perspective, there seems to be real strength in the theology and the dogma. I'll put it this way, in terms of like, this is who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and we're kind of not changing. But then at the same time, the Catholic stream hasn't splintered. You know what I mean? There
Not
seems to
very
be
much.
very little, compared
Yeah.
to Protestant
Right.
streams, which just splinter all the time. Right?
Totally.
Like
it's
even
it's
at home, we call
interesting.
it, at home, like when a church splits, we call it mad church. It's like, is that a church plan or is it a mad church?
Yeah,
It's like, I think it might be a mad
totally.
church.
No, there is something really comforting to me in the continuation of it.
Yeah, I think so too.
And to know that I can go into any Catholic church anywhere in the world, and even if I don't speak the language, I know what's happening. I know the order. I know, the form.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nice. But I will say, as a Catholic who has fallen out of the zealous convert stage and into the critical thinking Catholic stage,
Yeah.
I do find it difficult how inflexible it is.
Yeah. Right. You're up against some of the things.
Yeah, I'm like, I think actually I used to feel that people who dissented were so short-sighted and didn't, really know what absolute truth is and whatever.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, well, I don't think it's that simple. But
Yeah.
but I think at the same time, it probably explains some of why it hasn't splintered a ton.
That's
Because
right.
they, for better or for worse, and I think there have been both,
Of course.
the Catholic Church knows how to preserve hierarchy and structure and accountability, and that keeps things together a little bit better.
It does. Well, talk to me, because you've already hinted at this. Talk to me about, what does it mean to be a Catholic in sort of a modern worship evangelical space?
It's
because you're in both spaces. You have a foot in both worlds.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. It's a little bit like being a circus animal at first, because when I entered the kind of like mainstream worship industry, I've always existed on the fringe of it. I've never been right in the middle where everybody, the most successful, but I've interacted with and worked with, some of those artists that inspired me so early on, which is so amazing. And everyone's just kind of looking at you like a little cross-eyed, like, what do you mean you're a Catholic? I thought people only became non-Catholics.
Yeah.
I didn't know people became Catholics as adults, And there were people who were extremely not okay with it. I mean, there were moments like when I was on a major record label where I would go to radio stations and they would be like, you may not mention this,
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say the C word.
Just don't, even because we will have so much flack from the people who listen to the station, especially in the South,
Of course.
And so I was like, I don't need to mention it, but that's kind of strange,
Mm.
But I've quickly learned that there was a lot of anti-Catholic bias in a lot of the Protestant church. And honestly, for some pretty understandable reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of compassion and sympathy, I think, for people who were burned by their experience of Catholicism or their parents' experience of it, because it can, in certain communities or places, be an incredibly rigid and like formal and legalistic place, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I've come to a place where I've realized, I'm like, I think as much as the inner like researcher in me hates this conclusion, people's paths really are all different.
They are a lot of times, and it's come up on this podcast more than once, a couple times actually, and it's probably just because it's something I'm so aware of.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this idea that one of the most consistent metaphors in scripture is the idea of a journey.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all the stories are about people who are like going somewhere.
Yeah.
And Jesus, his ministry anyway, it's walking around, and his disciples follow him while they walk around.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those like sub notes that's kind of just in there. But like even in my own life, like my mother and father my dad was a non-practicing Baptist. My mother was Church of Christ, borderline fundamentalist. They got radically saved in the charismatic renewal of the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
My sister and I grew up really charismatic.
Yeah.
Very charismatic. And then we went to a sort of like a Church of Christ Christian church when we were in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm in sort of a charismatic movement. And the last probably 6 or 7 years, I've been most fed by Anglican theologians, Catholic theologians, contemplatives, and mystics, right? And so my journey is not that I'm no longer charismatic, but it's like...
Maybe you're just more expanded. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. But it's this idea that everybody's going to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Right?
And you can't, honestly, I feel like a lot of Christian movements not only try to experience and practice the beliefs they have, but they try to prescribe them to everybody.
Yeah, and it's like, it's hard to say how a person comes about.
Absolutely.
Faith or an experience or anything.
Absolutely. The Catholics that I met that introduced me to Catholicism anew anyway, because I had been around it in New Jersey, but I was like, oh, those people, they don't even go to Mass. That was my experience.
Yeah.
And I met like some devout, faithful, alive Catholic Christians, and they were charismatics. They were, and that was my intro into the kind of charismatic movement. It kind of all happened at the same time. I had a charismatic, I don't want to call it a phase either, but the first time that I dove into charismatic spirituality, because I would say I still practice. I mean, I'm a contemplative, mystical type of person.
I've just had too many mystical experiences.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, I can't really. I can deny whether I think they're related to God, but I can't deny they happened.
That's right.
It's just so, and they're, I don't know, and it's a whole other conversation. There's so many side trails I want to go down, but
Audrey, it's very interesting to me that you have had moments of touching so many parts of the church.
Yeah. Well, I was on a search,
Yeah.
And I kind of hit, not a dead end at Catholicism, but I was like, well, other than Orthodoxy, there's not really any older I can go with Christianity. So now I have gone back further. Yeah. I've studied Jewish mysticism a little bit and Kabbalah a little bit because I'm interested in, all of the ways that people have experienced or expressed faith in the world. But as far as practicing Christianity, this is basically as old as it gets. Yeah. So I'm like, well, there's really more further back to go.
Oh, amazing.
But
well, hey, let's take a left turn if we can.
Okay.
I want to talk to you about you as a writer and you as a producer.
Okay.
Okay. And if it's cool, I want to ask you, as a female writer and as a female worship leader, and someone that I would consider to be fairly prolific, like how many records do you have? 5, 6? I mean, you have some EPs and stuff.
Got 7 records out.
Yeah. Okay.
And
then you've worked on a ton of side projects with people. Yeah. I mean, it's fairly prolific.
I write a lot.
Yeah. And I know even just from your Instagram and then some of the moments that we've shared, like at Porter's Gate and stuff, it feels, my experience of you, it feels like you're kind of a songbird. It feels like there's just a song that's always in you and it could come spilling out at any moment. Yeah. And you don't really have to try for it. That's my experience.
Okay.
That may not be true.
Yeah.
But I just know that the modern worship world is kind of a boys' game a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would love to hear you talk to us about what it means to be a female writer and someone who is like consistently writing, not just for a week or two, but for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, when I started writing songs, I read about this. I found this like poetry challenge somewhere. I can't remember where I read it. It wouldn't have been maybe it was on the internet. I don't know. Anyway, it was like I was looking for ways to get inspired or to be open to inspiration more often or more easily because it was just such a new practice for me. And so I found this 30-day poetry challenge and it said, write a poem all day or every day for 30 days, beginning to end, even if you hate it. I mean, it's just the point is finishing. And so I was like, I think I'm going to do this with songs. So that's what I did. So for 30 days, I wrote a song every day. it just had to be done. I didn't have to like it. I didn't have to think it was good, but it had to be like, this is a finished piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I kept almost anything from that 30 days, but I felt like it taught me the discipline of what being a professional songwriter is, which is that you write a lot of things that you may not either keep or use as they are,
Mm-hmm.
but that showing up, similar to what you'd hear, Anne Lamott or a lot of other authors say, is that showing up is just half or more of the practice. And over time, I feel like I've honed the ability to drop into flow state more quickly.
Mm-hmm. What does flow state feel like for you?
Well, flow state is, I'll just define it for people who haven't heard of that. It seems like you probably have.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So like flow state would be a pseudo-technical name for the thing that happens in people, whether it's during surfing or writing music or preaching or singing or even being on a Navy SEAL team, or like these different places or situations you find yourself in where your amygdala kind of checks out a little bit. So you're not being run by the same portion of your brain as you would be in your normal day-to-day activities. You go into a place where it feels like you don't even have to think.
Yeah, the executive is off.
Yeah, you're just instinctively moving and you feel caught up in something. And that can happen to an individual. It can happen to whole groups. And I think that's what happens during praise and worship, if I'm honest. And I don't think that negates the fact that divine is involved. I think it just shows us what's happening in a demonstrable way, that it's a real phenomenon when people sometimes get into like that place with each other and how heavenly that can feel. And it's really good for us. Like our bodies and our brains need that break. So flow state is that.
Yeah, one of the first times that ever happened to me was here in Nashville.
Really?
At a Kevin Prosh moment. Kevin played one song that everybody kind of knew. And then for an hour, the music never stopped, and it was 100% spontaneous, and it was one of the most mind-blowing things I've ever seen.
That's amazing.
And no one in the room felt excluded.
No, everyone was locked in.
It was like we were all doing this together.
I have been there, and it's the best feeling.
It's amazing.
Oh, you just want to live there, but it's like not possible to.
Yeah.
But there's various ways that you can experience that. And for me, with songwriting, I am able to tell when it's happening because of course, it's happened to me enough times that I'm familiar with the physical sensations of that. It'd be pretty typical stuff like chills down your spine or a sudden, I don't know how to explain it. I mean, it happened to me at the last Porter's Gate thing we were at.
And for those of you you're clearly not here, you're just listening. Audrey just jumped in her seat.
I did.
Yeah, you did this. You did this little bump.
Because that's the feeling is like, oh wait, I'm not here. I'm not totally here anymore. I've been, and I would describe it visually as if, I've tried to describe this before, and I feel like it might only make sense to me, but okay, bear with me on my side trail, but
love it.
The cloud of witnesses is something we read about in Hebrews, right?
That's right.
I have come to a sort of interesting poetic truth idea of what that might mean on a, just in a practical way, for us living on the earth in this level of consciousness, in this dimension of time. And when I write a song that feels inspired, and not everyone feels like this, but when I write one that feels inspired and almost like I didn't have to even write it or think about it, it feels to me like I'm pulling it. I'm gesturing right now towards the sky. Like I'm pulling it down. I'm taking like combinations of thoughts and ideas down and putting them together in a new order. And I think about the cloud of witnesses. I'm like, all those consciousnesses, all those experiences, all of those thoughts and beliefs and dreams that every one of those people has had, I think exists like in a cloud. And sometimes I feel like inspiration is just for a moment, for some reason during the day or my week, I'm catching like a glimmer of light from that cloud or sound. And then I look at it and I sort of am transported into that place.
Well, listen, I'm just medieval enough to believe all of that. I have zero issues with that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, those of us who have experienced that feeling or that state in any way know that you want to know more about why and how it happens. So
it's like you received it.
Yeah.
It's not like it even came from you.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's like, I was just here and I just
Totally. I just happened to have the ears to hear this for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
But so I feel like part of my job is showing up often and differently enough, in a variety of ways
mm-hmm.
to be available to that.
What are some of the ways that you show up?
Well, I come here a lot and just kind of sit and try things. And I've learned that it is not always the right move for me to sit down and try to write a lyric and a melody. Sometimes I get into my Logic or whatever, which is my, DAW, as they're called.
That's right.
But I get in here and I open different patches and plugins and start just making sounds for hours. Sometimes I'll do it for hours. Like, I get so lost in that. And that is where a lot of my songs come out of now, is that I sit and just make sounds.
You're looking for inspiration.
Yeah. And something will just take hold. Not every time, not every day, but that practice has worked.
Do you ever have to leave here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually, my last record, Evergreen, I did the majority of the pre-production, which was kind of like all of the initial sound making and, mapping out and arranging at a coffee shop with my headphones on.
Really? So public space?
Yeah, I brought like a little keyboard, this one here.
Yeah, that little guy.
And it has a pedal and everything. And I brought my hard drives.
Yeah.
And I built the beginnings of all of those tracks.
Amazing.
At a cafe, because it just was the nature of that project. I don't know why, but I felt suffocated in this little room. And so I was like, okay, I guess the visual white noise of people walking by was what I needed for some reason. Mm-hmm. So I try to just be responsive and sensitive to what needs to happen. And it really isn't the same every day. But that's one way, is coming here and working on, or going to a coffee shop and working on sounds. And then another thing that I do is I pretty regularly read. I mean, I feel like that's one of the biggest ways I show up to my work is reading, because many of the songs I have that have been the most beloved have been from something I read. A thought that was sparked by.
Concept?
Either it was just I was reading this thing and this idea came to me, or I actually set that thing to music. That's happened many times as well. Which feels a little bit like cheating, but for church music, I'm like, I don't know why it would be, because it's like, why wouldn't I want to set a poem by Cardinal Newman that's never been a piece of music that the church sings at large? Why wouldn't I want to set that to music, and give it as a gift to other people who may never have read this? But yeah, many, many, many of my songs come out of reading. So those are probably the two biggest ways that I do. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that you have a practice of expression, or maybe what we might call pouring out.
Yeah.
But then you also have an experience or a practice of pouring in.
Yeah.
Receiving something. So
Absolutely.
reading or anything that you can do to bring something.
And then I co-write a little bit too. I used to do it a lot more. Now I only have 4, 5, 6 people that I do that with on a regular basis. I mean, probably only 2 or 3 that I do it with on a regular basis.
Do you enjoy co-writing?
I really do.
Okay.
Because I think the opportunity, the experience of getting into that place of inspiration with someone else or a group of people is really special on its own. I mean, I love that.
Okay, so talk to me about a co-writing session that would be great for you. Like,
so
what is the optimal setup?
Again, it can be very different. I have one. It depends on the person, Do
you like to show up with nothing, or do you like to show up with some ideas?
Oh, it depends on the person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's one guy in my life who I've written a bunch of songs with, but I've always come with the idea, and it just works so well.
So you come with just something kind of raw, maybe
just
a chorus?
Some idea, yeah, like a line, even just a thought, but something that I'm like, I want to write a song about this, or based on this, or with this lyric, or whatever. And he and I we wrote I Shall Not Want together.
Yeah.
We wrote on the last album, we wrote Evergreen and Deliverer together. We wrote Even the Winter on one of my older albums, and a couple others, new song on my second album. And it's always been that.
Yeah.
But it works really well for some reason.
Did you complete those songs in the moment, in the session, or did you just get them down the field a bit?
all of those were completed in the session. It's not
I
always
love-
like that.
I freaking love that though.
It's not always like that. And I've learned.
Chemistry is so important.
It is
though.
important.
Oh,
and it
gosh.
only exists with certain people and sometimes only for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
It's like you evolve or they evolve and suddenly the chemistry is different. And
Yeah.
sometimes it stays for a long time. Sometimes it doesn't. With him, I've been writing with him since 2009. So,
I think that's beautiful.
And then we only write once every couple of years. It's funny.
No way.
Yeah. Every time I have an album, I call him up. And then I have another friend. So
maybe you should call him twice.
Maybe
a year.
I should.
I don't know.
I know.
You
Maybe I should.
Twice
It's
a year,
funny.
put it on the calendar.
I just I'm such a gut-driven person in spite of being such a researcher. I think maybe I research to compensate for how gut-driven I am because I am like, I know what I need to do. And now I need to justify it.
That's so funny.
With writing, I am so gut-driven. It's like, I know who the co-writers are for this album. I know who they need to be. I know what...
It's just your instinct kicks in. Your intuition is on overdrive.
Yes. I mean, that's how I've done it from the beginning.
Mm.
And I have another friend named Seth who I have this band with called Lev. It's a dance project.
Okay, spell that.
Levv.
Levv.
And we write what I call conscious contemplative dance music.
Are you going to take some of that to Sweden and Norway with you?
Oh yeah, we're going to be writing when we're there.
Okay, because they're gonna flip and love that.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of my songwriting heroes are out of there. So we've been working on this in some form since 2013. And the other day we had a very unique songwriting experience that really floored me. Where I was like, I do not know I don't understand what just happened.
Yeah, tell me.
He wasn't here. So we were we were on the phone. He was telling me about something going on in his life. We were on the phone and I felt it come over me as he was talking. And he finished talking.
Like the song idea?
Yeah. Like the song title, the song concept, and kind of some of the lyrics just arrived. Mm-hmm. And I felt like my whole body, I feel it now. It's like I can go back to it. Just like pinpricks everywhere. Because I realized, I was like, this is an inspired idea. And he finished talking about what was happening and we talked about it a little bit. And then afterwards I said, I have this idea. It's called Orbit.
Yeah.
And I'm going to send you something tomorrow. And he was like, okay. So I came in here the next day. And it's like this much of the time with inspiration, I don't remember how I wrote it exactly, but I wrote this song and it was just, so here's the weirdest part, as I said, the person he was talking about, I said, what planet do they remind you most of?
Okay.
And he told me, and then I said, give me 6 descriptive words about this person.
Yeah.
Color and texture related. He said it, and he did. And I wrote the whole song based on that. Yeah. And I Googled this planet and I read all about it. And then I found that there was this moon that had orbited it temporarily for a few hundred years. And it just, anyway, long story short, I write this whole song and send it to him. And I'm like, I think this is one of the best things I've ever written. And I just would never have written it without you. Because I wouldn't have been this would never have come to me. It's like the same way that sometimes I'm inspired and I plug into the cloud of witnesses in some way. There's a lock and key situation with certain collaborators where I'm like, only we would find this idea.
That's right.
So when I find one of those collaborators, I'm really, really grateful and really lean into it.
And you know what I hear in the story that you just said? I hear both your sort of instinctual, inspirational, reaching up into the cloud of witnesses, woo-woo self. Mm-hmm. And I also hear your researcher.
Oh, right?
Yeah. So you have this conversation with him.
I'm a Googler while I'm writing.
And that's it. But then you start digging about the planet. Yeah. Yeah.
I love to I love to read. I end up on Google almost every time I'm writing anything. I mean, just because it's like if I didn't have the internet, I would be a person who was in their library looking through encyclopedias and dictionaries and absolutely. But so anyway, what was the original question?
Well, we're just talking about co-writing.
Do I like co-writing? I do. I love collaboration.
Okay, so not to be too granular, but what do you do when a co-writing session isn't working?
change locations,
Yeah.
eat a meal.
Yes.
I always also say to people during, like, hey, if we don't come out with a song at the end of this, it's okay. And I don't need it to happen.
That's right.
You know, we're trying out to see what our dynamic is. And it could be, and this has happened before, that we write this one time and we never write again. It could be that we write this one time and we only come up with half of it and we'll finish it. I'm working on something like that right now with somebody that we came up with a chorus that we love and hadn't written almost anything else except some chord progressions. But, you know, I think pressure kills it, you know?
It does.
I just like, so I always say something like that if it's a new person.
Just sort of set the expectations.
Yeah,
that
it's
it
like,
can be
hey,
loose
we're just
and
we're here to do some mining.
That's it.
If we find something, we do. If we don't, we don't.
I love that.
It's just part of the practice, so it's not failure. And I think pressure, it really washes out creativity. So.
Moving on from songwriting into producing records, because I know you do that. And I'm not telling you something that you don't already know, but there are very few female record producers.
Yeah, there are fewer than male, for sure.
But it's way fewer. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I think the audio field in general is about 2% female.
Yeah, it's just not.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's low representation. And you and I were talking about this off mic before we started the podcast, that there are no females who have won a Grammy for record producing outside of the classical category. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What do you what do you think about this?
Man,
I'm just happy that you are producing records.
I am too.
Because I think record producing probably does need some female energy.
Yeah,
right?
I think everything does. I think everything does. Everything needs all the energies that exist, you know, if it's going to reflect the spectrum of humanity anyway. Mm-hmm. Representation is a real piece of why women are not producers. I know that I got the bug when I was making my first couple albums. I was like, wait a minute, why am I not doing this? But I didn't know anything, you know, and I didn't know if women could do it because I didn't see any women doing it. And so then I just, the knowledge gap was just huge because it had never even occurred to me that a woman could produce her own albums. I had never heard of that happening. Mm-hmm. So by the time that I started, it's not that it was too late, but I was years behind, you know, all these people that had sort of, just by virtue of seeing male producers. And think about all the places this might happen. So if you're a music head like me, or just a person who loves music and you watch music documentaries and you watch, you know, films based on the lives of your favorite artists and you watch the news and you watch, like every time you see a studio, who's sitting in the director's chair? A man. So there's nothing wrong with them being there. But if you're a girl, it just reinforces the deep sort of subtle story that this is a man's job. Mm-hmm. So then you don't even like necessarily entertain the idea of doing it till much later, which is what happened to me. And then when I had the bug to do it, I was met with resistance. So from the executives I worked with, they were like, well, that's cool that you want to do that. But like these people have already worked and figured this out. So like,
we'll
we can't really afford. Yeah. We can't really afford for you to have a few terrible, you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I heard them and I was like, okay, that's fine. And then I just started learning on my own, which is what I should have done anyway, you know. And
by learning, you mean learning the actual like software and learning.
I just bought the software and started learning. You know,
learning how to engineer.
Yeah. And that has become, I have a long way to go. We always do, but I have gotten to a place where I'm like confident that I can move quickly.
Do you love this part of it?
Oh yeah, it's my favorite. I now almost always write and produce at the same time. So the tracks that I go into the studio with now, if I'm tracking drums or guitar, are very fleshed out. They have a character and a lot of the programming and keys work is done. Maybe even the vocal is done. So I'm coming in with almost done things regularly now when I do go.
Because you have that power of understanding engineering and
right.
That's big.
And I think women will start doing it more as other women are visibly doing it. And so one of the reasons I mention it so much is because I'm like, I think there might be, kids out there who need to hear that I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because the bias it's a typical story, but the bias is real in that people assume that I didn't produce my own work. And then even when they know I produced my own work, I've had a situation a while back with a friend who knows this about me, and he's a feminist, I would even say. And it wasn't something that even made me angry. It was more like, it's how deep the bias runs. Like it runs in me too.
Sure.
Not just him, but like I played him a track that I was working on, and he said, "Who did you write this with? Did you write it with anybody?" And I said, "This guy, Eric." And he said, "Oh, did he make this?" I was like, "No, I made it."
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, yeah, I don't know why I assumed that, but it's just what we're used to."
Yeah, it's the music industry, right?
Yeah. So, and the Christian music industry is definitely no exception to the general rule. I mean, it is the same. The numbers are basically the same.
Yeah, and it seems, without getting too far in the weeds here, but like, it seems like female participation and just women in general being a part of the music world is mostly on the performer side, right? And then even then, like sometimes the windows are very small, right? We need you to be young.
Yeah.
We need you to be very
pretty.
prototypically pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. No, totally. And when I was signed, the conversations were so funny. I mean, this is not intended to be a dig on myself, but I have just never been the prototypically beautiful woman. I think that I'm a beautiful woman, but I do not fit the narrow sort of societal standards for what that is for most people. And I've grown more secure with that over time. But like the conversations that were had around the record deal were funny because it was kind of like, well, we're definitely going to have to lean into the quirky, like Ingrid Michaelson thing because it doesn't feel like you're really, how would they say it?
And what were you thinking during these conversations?
I
mean, painful?
I was
was it painful?
I was kind of like, okay, I understand.
Do you know what they were getting at?
I almost wish they were more upfront about it because I was like, I feel like you're trying to coddle me. I get what you're saying. And like it caused some weird artistic choices because they were like, you need to be quirky. So like on the first album cover, I have yarn in my hair. Like, I don't wear yarn in my hair. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like...
Few people do.
No, they don't. Yeah, this is not a thing. And so... And I'm wearing this just crazy outfit for me. I mean, it was just like, okay, I get... We're trying to make me look weird so that I don't look unpretty.
Yeah.
And then there was a moment where, with the first album, we had one picture selected for the cover. And then they changed it like out of nowhere. And I was like, why is it different? And they were like, well, to be truthful, we handed out a copy of each photograph to every man in the building.
No.
And asked them which one looked more flirtatious.
No.
Yes.
Audrey.
And I was like,
that's a tough story.
It's a weird, that dynamic became the biggest reason that I ended up. Basically, I took a risk and decided, I was like, I am going to refuse, to engage with a lot of these things. And if they throw me out, they throw me out. And that's what happened. I got let go, but actually I wanted to be let go because I wanted to be on my own and make my own decisions and drive the process myself. But in the season where I basically dug my heels in and was like, no, the feedback was interesting.
Wow.
They were there. I started asking more questions about money. That was not received well at all. And it happened because we went and did an event in New York, and I knew the budget because I asked, and the budget was $8,000. And we spent all of that on rehearsals and musicians, and we were making a live EP or whatever, and lodging and meals, and we were maxed out, itemized. I saw the whole budget. I knew what it was. And then they were like, let's go out to dinner after the event. And I looked at the bill because I went up to the server and said, can I look at the bill, please? And it was $5,000 for dinner. Yeah. And I was so angry that I fell asleep at the table.
Yeah.
I shut down completely. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I have to recoup this money. Y'all don't have to recoup this money. You have a check that comes to you every year. I have to make this back.
Yeah.
And it was like, it occurred to me for the first time that I needed to take ownership back. And so I went to them the next week and I said, I'm coming to every marketing meeting every Friday.
Wow.
And they were like, what? And I'm like, I want to know why we are spending the money we're spending because this is ridiculous. And it just didn't go well.
Because you knew that you had to recoup.
Yeah. And I'm like, they did not take it well.
Yeah.
I mean, the president of the company called me in and said, I have dropped many women for being far less opinionated than you are.
Oosh. Oosh.
And I was like, okay, that's fine. Thank you for letting me know, and I just was like, here's the deal. If I can't be involved, I'm not doing it.
Okay. So how much of that do you think was you being maybe a prototypical artist and those companies just keeping artists out of those conversations? And how much of this is, do you think, like boys club and we just don't need that from you?
It was a mix. But I will say there were several artists that did have like imprints and such, like label imprints or like a distribution deal with their own label, and they were all men. So I knew that there were men that engaged in this way.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a culture in major labels of definitely wanting the artist to just shut up and sing a little bit. So that's both. I think it was both, if I'm realistic. Yeah,
so you're on this journey of not just being a female songwriter, but producing records and really taking ownership of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I somewhere in there I realized, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I realized, like, I have a vision and the buck stops with me. If I'm not happy with an album I put out, it's my fault. Yeah. And I can't continue to work in such an environment where, like, there's thousands of cooks in the kitchen. It's never going to be something I'm happy with, but it's still my fault. It still stops with me. And I just felt the burden of stewardship, I think, and realized that while that environment may be the environment for some people, it was not where I was going to thrive. So they let me go. They didn't renew my next option. And I launched the Kickstarter the day after my option ran out, and I started out on my own.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Amazing story. Well, two more questions.
Sure.
If that's cool. One, what would you just say to female writers and female worship leaders? Maybe they're at a church every single week, and maybe they're in their 20s or maybe they're older. Maybe they even have a baby or two. What would you like to say, if anything, to those writers and those leaders about taking their space and owning their female energy and the possibilities that really do exist?
Well, firstly, I would say that feminine energy looks very different from woman to woman. And I think one thing that encourages tokenism is the idea that all feminine energy is the same. For example,
unpack that.
We need some feminine energy in our worship set, so we're going to have so-and-so come out and do the song about Jesus, the husband, or...
Oh, yeah, I got it. Yeah.
So, like, feminine energy is always receptive.
Submissive.
It's always this. It's always that. That, I think... So there are a lot of women out there who are like, that's not my energy. And not that they would say it's bad to be receptive or that it's bad to be nurturing or that they're not those things, but that's not how they walk into a room or the foot they lead with, And so there are lots of different types of men and lots of different types of women. And so I think the most beautiful examples of church worship services are when you see different types of men and different types of women involved. You get a sense of the spectrum of what it means to be a human being. And so whatever version of feminine a woman is important to the picture, whether that is what people might stereotype as femininity or whether it is not.
What's interesting right now for me anyway in modern worship is sort of the classic female vocal, or what we might consider to be classic female just way in the world of nurturing and tenderness and gentleness. You hear very little of that in the modern worship world right now. It's like it's all power.
It's all power. And I think I've thought about that quite a bit.
It's very interesting.
I don't have that kind of voice. I've often been jealous actually of that, because I'm like, I wish I had that. And I've realized that part of the reason I think that it resonates so much is that there's a dearth and a deficit in the world of women being in powerful positions or living from their power. It's a whole other conversation, but I think it resonates with women in particular because they're like, that is me. I am that person. I have power.
Well, the only reason I brought it up is I've been concerned that that young girls are thinking, well, that's
how I have to be.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's whenever you get a homogenous representation of what it means to be a man or a woman, then people grow up looking at it and go, I have to be that way.
Yeah.
Either way, honestly. And it's like, I wish there were just more variety in general with men and with women. It's like every man doesn't have to be a warrior energy all the time. And every woman doesn't have to be a warrior energy all the time. Or like we can actually fluctuate and go in and out of different things. But it
just shows you how much, and it shows you how much, I'm just wondering how much of this conversation is sort of rooted in what our wider culture is trying to tell us.
Or a response to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. We'll fight the power, or like we're going to, whatever. And yeah, it's like, gosh, every man is trying to be a warrior. Every woman's trying to be a warrior. I've been thinking recently, what is going on in culture that everybody feels like they got to suit up?
I mean, it's pretty
obvious.
We'll have to have that conversation over.
It's pretty obvious, right?
I think so.
It is a thing.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know if it's that one-to-one directly influenced, but I think that, yes, these trends in worship music follow a pattern for a reason. My favorite things are usually the simplest and the kind of stuff that anyone could sing in any way. And it's really hard to write that kind of song. But they're out there, you know.
Well, my friend, and you know him, Sam Yoder, he's brilliant. But Sam's mind works in such a wonderful way. And he will take worship songs, either he's written or someone else has written, and he'll get on a piano and he'll look at the highest note, the lowest note, and he'll just count notes and whatnot. Yeah. And we've even talked about a song that we've talked about this morning, even the Martin Smith song.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's like 5 or 6 notes between it.
That's it.
It's so close to it. And it's really hard to write those songs.
It's really close. So Sam, if he's writing something for church, will really try to narrow just the dynamic melodic range, because he knows that song is it can go anywhere.
Yeah. Right? I love that.
Yeah.
That's so wise.
Yeah.
I think there's a place for all of it, you know.
Of course there is.
And so with women, if I had to communicate something to them, I think it's really important not to let what is represented on stage be the only meter or metric you have for what's either appropriate or possible. Because if we live like that, no women will ever become producers. No women will ever become preachers, you know, in certain environments. So there is a level to which I think we have to go into ourselves and into our relationship to God and into the broader picture of what the church is and say, what is possible based on this broad picture, not just what I'm seeing every Sunday, because some women are not seeing women up on a platform. I certainly never did, you know. So
but here you are.
Here I am.
Yeah.
This is all very possible.
You're giving people permission.
I hope so.
I think you are.
That's awesome.
I really do. I think you are. Okay, one more question.
Okay.
This is the question we ask everyone on this podcast at the end.
I like these.
Yeah, it's our little roundup question. Could you just share with us a time you experienced great joy?
Great joy.
Yeah. Great joy.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind is the birth of my second child.
Okay.
The birth of my first child was a traumatic delivery, and it was also my first time, and I was just bewildered. Like, what the hell just happened to me? The second time, though, I went into an absolute, okay, speaking of flow state.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to the midwife center and they were like, oh yeah, well, you'll probably have this baby tomorrow morning. It was like 7 p.m. because I was so calm and so unmoved. But I was in the most pain I'd ever been in my life, but I was in a trance. I was just laying on the bed.
Yeah.
Like, these contractions were happening and they're like, oh, we're going to go, work with this other person. And I'm like, oh, the baby's head is coming out.
Yeah.
They're like, what? Because I just was so surrendered. And she came out. I was like there for 30 minutes before she was born. And I grabbed her and I was
grabbed her?
I grabbed her. Yeah.
Was anyone else in the room?
Yes, but they were all scrambling to get, it was just so fast, And I reached down and I grabbed her and I was like, oh, there you are. And I felt like I knew her. I was just like, I know you. This is so, I was definitely in bliss, just so overjoyed to meet her and see her face. And it was a really healing experience because my first experience had been so brutal that I had to go to like all kinds of therapy, not just physical, because of that experience. And so it was a really joyful moment for more reasons than one. That's probably the biggest flashpoint of joy I can recall of recent years.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Audrey, thank you for doing this with us.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks
and I have like a zillion more questions. So that just means we have
to keep talking.
That just means we have to come back.
Yeah.
All right.
Do it again.
All right, everybody. Have a good one. Peace.
Hey everybody, this is Casey Corum, the producer of the Ferment podcast. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I've got a couple ways you could really help us. First of all, review the podcast on iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media, on Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and on Twitter at FermentCast. All right, people, see you next time.